Hi, I'm Matt Fotis. I'm assistant professor in the theater department, and I am directing God of Carnage.
I'm Cocol Bernal. I am the designer of God of Carnage, and I'm an artist.
I chose to direct God of Carnage for a number of reasons. First and foremost, when I first read the play, it just jumped off the page at me, and I could sort of see it playing in my head. And so for me, that's always sort of a great cue that this is a good play that I really engage with. I also really enjoy the subject matter of it. It's about parents who are getting together to sort of settle a dispute between their two sons who got in a playground altercation. Um, and a lot of the play then becomes about how selfish and isolated and involved these adults are when they're really trying to help settle this problem. So for me, I felt like that was a really um, cool idea and something that's relatable because I have some little kids now of my own.
I have done another play by the same author, by Yasmina Reza, Art, which is a little bit similar, but it was done with less furniture, less things on stage. So this is unique because also it's the first time that I'm working with a director other than Jeff.
Well, my initial metaphor for the play was sand because I felt like, when sand is wet, it comes together and you can mold it and you can do lots of really neat things to it. You can build, a cityscape of New York out of sand, right? If you wanted to. But when sand is dry, it falls through your fingers. It's isolated. It's separate. And so one of the things that were talked about sort of in initial meetings was where's the water in the play? Where do things come together? Where do the characters choose to come together and where do they choose to be isolated?
I think partly the idea for the sand came when Matt was talking about sand. He had that idea in his head, a sandbox. And there's a story, this is a little story about my childhood. When I was 4 years old, I was in Japan with my parents, of course, not by myself. And we were in the Imperial Gardens in Kyoto where we were invited to a lunch. And I was put in the care of a geisha uh, while my parents were dining, very elegant lunch. And there was this beautiful Zen garden, Japanese Zen garden, where all the sand had been just beautifully modeled around the rocks. And then there was a part that had black rocks, black stones, and then the sand. And it was just lovely how it was separated one from the other. They didn't touch each other, but they were next to each other. And everything was just perfect. And she got distracted a little bit. And by the time she looked back, the black stones and the sand were totally together. And it had become a mess. That beautiful little Zen garden that was probably 1,000 years old had become a total mess. So that's what I was thinking. What happens when you put a child in a Zen garden? It's not going to stay pristine and perfect. It's going to be a total chaos. And that's what I liked about the Zen garden. It is a sandbox for adults, basically. And when the adults misbehave and act like children, then and start vomiting on it, and then it becomes chaos. It becomes just like a sandbox.
It doesn't necessarily have a really climactic end in that everything gets wrapped up really nicely. Um, we sort of have an ending that maybe feels a little unsettled. And I think that's part of what makes the play really work well, but it doesn't have that sort of traditional, the prince and the princess don't get married at the end of this play. And then technically, there's some vomit that happens on stage, which is we're all very excited about. We're trying to figure out how to make that happen and how to keep it clean enough that we can make it happen a number of times. Um, and then for the actors, and part of a directing challenge is that two of them never leave the stage, and two of them leave the stage for about 2 minutes total. So they're on stage for about 90 minutes without really a break. So keeping the momentum going and keeping the actors and audience engaged without having those breaks that we're kind of accustomed to will be a challenge.
There are a lot of challenges in this play. As the designer, first of all, we got to deal with vomit on stage, lots of vomit on stage, and that's something that I've never done before. So how do you set up somebody vomiting on stage, and you have to do this several nights, and that's a big challenge. And this is not just like vomit. This is like explosive everywhere vomit. So it's interesting. And also the sand. The sand is going to be a challenge whether the actors can act in the sand because they're not really acknowledging the sand. It's not there, but it is there. It's metaphorical, but it's real at the same time. So that makes it a big challenge, but I think mostly for the actors and for us.
I think a college audience will really relate to it well because it's about choosing to be isolated or choosing to connect with people. And one of the things about college and Albright in specific is that we really encourage connections and people make connections, both socially and intellectually, sort of throughout the community. And it's learning how to make those connections and then seeing what happens when you don't. And a lot of this play is about adults sort of choosing to cut themselves off, choosing to isolate themselves. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to look at when you're sort of in your early 20s, late teens, of what sort of choices do I want to make? What kind of person do I want to become? And I think this show kind of asks those questions of people, and I think that'll relate. And there's some really funny moments, and people like to laugh.